What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Courtside Podcast here on the Basketball Network. As always, I'm Caleb, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Connor. Connor, another special episode. How we doing?
Doing good. Excited. I think we have probably one of the most interesting divisions set for today with the Northwest. Um, but yeah, and then I also think there's been a lot of basketball news the past like 24 hours. I feel like the transition through is pretty exciting too. So honestly, solid episode from top to bottom.
For
Uh,
sure. For sure.
yeah.
And excited to get jumped into it today. So quick outline of what today's show is going to look like. So as Connor mentioned, we're going to be going over the Northwest Division, going over some key storylines on can the Oklahoma City Thunder make it to the conference finals this year? Finished with the 1 seed last year, but can they actually make it all the way? Will the Denver Nuggets get back to title contention? And what is Minnesota going to look like without Karl Anthony Towns, and a lot more? But as always, let's go ahead and jump into the transition three. So as Connor mentioned, a lot has happened in the world of basketball in the past 24 to 48 hours. And one of the most notable ones is actually an injury news. So Isaiah Hartenstein has suffered a small non-displaced fracture in his left hand in Tuesday's preseason game against Denver. This was reported by Shams. And he will actually be reevaluated in 5 to 6 weeks. So that means the Thunder are going to be without one of their big men for the first part of the season. Connor, this could be a big implication to how the Thunder start the year. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So I don't want to get in too much detail because I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot throughout the episode. But obviously, big blow for the Thunder, someone that they brought in to kind of address that size issue that they have, or that they had last season, which was pretty evident, I think, in that second round loss to the Mavs last year. But good news. I know it's pretty much the first full month of the season, but it is only 5 to 6 weeks, which they'll pretty much be running with the same starters, that they had for most of last year. Or obviously they lost one key starter probably, but I think for the most part they have the same roster even without Hartenstein as last year. So I think they should be fine.
Yeah, obviously they still got Chet Holmgren, and we'll talk about the full Thunder team later on in the episode. But big news coming out of the Thunder camp, and obviously unfortunate when you see a player go down to injury, especially in the preseason. So hopefully a speedy recovery there. But next up in the transition three, we're actually moving over to the WNBA, and where the WNBA Finals is currently going on, and the New York Liberty just took a 2-1 lead against the Minnesota Lynx. And that was off of Sabrina Ionescu's amazing shot at the end of the game. Connor, I'll let you recap it a little bit, but I mean, that was an exciting thing to watch.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I'm not sure how many people actually watched the game, but I feel like the whole game was pretty entertaining. Like it never really got out of hand at one point for either team. And I know that fourth quarter, that there was a lead change and it really stayed close. Obviously capped off by that immaculate, nearly half court shot. I was talking to my wife, because she's a big Thunder fan, and I was like, it kind of reminded me of Steph Curry hitting that three against the Thunder. But also, I mean, Brenna Stewart had a crazy game, 30 points, 11 rebounds. And Collier with the Liberty, 22 points, 9 rebounds. I don't know, exciting basketball. Not sure how many people are watching the WNBA because Caitlin Clark's not in it anymore, but still some exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, a lot of pros, especially from the NBA side, were tweeting out after that shot saying it looked like Steph Curry. So I can definitely see where you got that comparison from. But just a quick recap, she basically got the ball with like 10 seconds left and was going one-on-one and did a little hesitation, crossed over to her left, and again, as Connor mentioned, pulled up from basically the logo at the center court and drained it with 1 second left for the New York Liberty to win by 3 points. Ionescu was great in that game, but obviously Brianna Stewart was kind of the story, dropping 30 and 11, finishing it with that double-double, but taking a 2-1 lead. And good to know in the WNBA, it's actually only a 5-game series, so if the Liberty win the next game, then they're going to be your WNBA champions. But we'll go ahead and move on to our last piece of news. So in our previous episode, we went over ESPN's rankings of the 100 through 51st best players in the NBA, but they actually just released the full rankings. In this episode, we're going to be going over the number 11 through 50 NBA players and had some interesting takes on that again. Connor, what were your initial thoughts here? Who did you think was maybe overrated or maybe a little underrated?
Well, I'll give you kind of my three that I think we might agree with that might be a little overrated. And that's going to be Damian Lillard at 23, Derek White at 39, and Drew Holiday at 36.
Hmm.
All right. So Damian Lillard, I think we all know the kind of player that he used to be. I know down year last year. I just don't think you can convince me he's the 23rd best player currently in the NBA. Not saying, he's not a top 50 player. I just don't think he's a top 25 player right now. And then Derek White and Drew Holiday, I was kind of expecting them to be this high just because it seems like, whenever the championship team just always seems to have, their players ranked high. I think, if I'm not mistaken, every single starting five on the Celtics are was it top 40 or top 50? Because I know Porzingis was in here as well.
Top 50, Porzingis came in at 46.
Yes, exactly. Which I think is just insane that all five starters, because we know Brown and Tatum are going to be, top 15. But yeah, which I'm not saying, once again, they're not good players. I just think there's players on other teams, who are better than these guys individually. I just think these two dudes just, complement their team well, and so that's probably why they're this high.
Yep, I agree. Derek White was definitely the biggest surprise for me. I think if you've watched all of our previous episodes, I might not be his biggest fan, just think he's a great role player. But just for kind of putting it into perspective, Derek White came in at 39, and that was above James Harden. So we're saying that Derek White is a better NBA player than James Harden. I know Harden's in the later part of his career, but just in my opinion, that is not the case. I think one is a star and one's more of a role player. And so that was very surprising. But to your point, once a team wins a championship, those starters can get a little overinflated. Good to see that Scotty Barnes actually moves up from 63 last year to 35 this year. So that was another player to see an exciting jump. And then Chet Holmgren might have had one of the biggest jumps, going from 73 last year all the way to 32 this year. So definitely think he's, deserving of that spot, but just exciting to see that he's getting the respect that he deserves on that front.
Oh, 100%. So you can see I'm kind of an OKC advocate as a resident in OKC. Chet got his flowers, and they are well-deserved.
Exactly. And I think the last one we got to call out, Victor Wembanyama coming in at number 11. So not yet cracking the top 10, but we got a sophomore in the league already at number 11. And I'm assuming by the end of this season, he's probably going to be a top 10 player in the league.
Yeah. Personally, I think it's a little high at the current moment. But obviously I think a lot of these rankings are based on projection. And I think the league-wide attitude is that he is going to be a top 10 player. But obviously I don't think they were going to put him in the top 10 to start off his sophomore season. But yeah, obviously I think it's a lot of hype, which I don't agree with ranking necessary players based off their hype. I like to rank players off their production, how much are they contributing wins to their team, whatnot. But yeah, I think there's no doubt top 10 is in his future.
100%. Just a player that we've never seen before. But hey, that leaves us left with the top 10, and I'm sure we'll cover that in our next episode. But let's go ahead and jump into the Northwest Division. So I'll quickly go over what we've been doing for each of these episodes, but you've probably heard it already. But we're going to be going through each team in the Northwest Division, talking about who they brought in, who left, and who's returning. Also kind of setting the scene on what we predict this team's season is going to look like. We're going to be putting them in one of four categories. So our categories are contender, so contending for that NBA championship, a playoff lock. So maybe not yet a contender, but they'll for sure be seeing them in the playoffs. A play-in / bubble team. So kind of on the fringe of making the playoffs, maybe end up in that play-in tournament. And then lastly, in complete rebuild mode, where we think they're going to be tanking for Cooper Flag. So the 5 teams we got in the Northwest Division are the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Portland Trailblazers, and the Utah Jazz. And to start it off, we're going to go ahead and go over to Denver, where we meet up with the Nuggets. And I feel like the question that the Denver Nuggets are asking this season, and we're all asking about the Denver Nuggets, is can they get back to title contention? Obviously, won the finals a few years ago, but last season finished third in the West and ended up losing in the second round to the Timberwolves and ended with a record of 57-25. Return a lot of their core with Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, and then obviously some more role players in Zeke Naji and Peyton Watson. And then brought in a few key pieces with Russell Westbrook, Dario Saric, who had a good year last year, and as well as a trio of rookies in Day'Ron Holmes, Trey Alexander, and PJ Hall. But then had a few key losses, I would say, in terms of rotation pieces from last year's team, which was Reggie Jackson that ended up being traded, and then Kentavious Caldwell-Pope that left in free agency. So a lot of moving pieces with this team year. Connor, what's your expectations?
Yeah, I still have them as a contender. I think until a team proves to slow down Jokic, I think it took a team full of all-stars in the Olympics to slow down Jokic, and even then it almost wasn't enough. But yeah, I think he's just proven to be kind of unguardable. It just seems no matter which big man you put on him, he just seems to find a way to put the ball in. Whether it's his hook shot or whether it's his off the 1 foot fade from like 30 foot out and it just somehow swishes in, every time. I just think he's still just a little unstoppable. And I know a lot of people have kind of been freaking out about Jamal Murray just because he struggled towards the end of the season, struggled in the Olympics, which I think is a little overblown. It's not unusual for players to go into a slump, especially towards the end of the playoffs. And then I don't even know why we're really considering the Olympics performance. NBA players are consistently known to struggle when playing in international play just because the rules are different. The 3-point line is different. It's just an adjustment. Even Steph Curry historically struggled to shoot in the Olympics. But yeah, I think the biggest thing though is they are asking a lot of Christian Brown. He's probably projected to be their starter. He's going to have to pick up, offensively. We know he can shoot spot up threes, but they're going to be asking a lot more of him just because they've lost KCP. And then I think defensively, he's not really known for that. He's known to struggle on that end.
Yep. Completely agree with all of the pieces that you mentioned, and I would definitely put them in the contender place as well. As you said, Nikola Jokic is one of, if not the best player in the NBA at this current point in time, and obviously is on triple-double watch every single time he plays. Honestly, my front runner to be MVP again. Just what this guy brings to the table is nothing short of extraordinary, and don't know if teams have, honestly, if they know how to guard it just yet or if they ever will. I feel like when you have a guy like that on your team, you have to put them as a contender. And I agree fully with what you had mentioned about Jamal Murray. I think everything's kind of been blown out of proportion in terms of his struggles. Jamal Murray's still a great player. I mean, Jamal Murray's a former All-Star, also just like a guy that is consistently going to be there. And to be honest, when you play alongside a guy like Nikola Jokic, you don't have to be amazing every single night because Nikola Jokic is going to be there, right? And then they have other guys, like you mentioned, Christian Brown, who's going to have to probably take a step up and be that start at that shooting guard role. But then you got Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon. I project Michael Porter Jr. to continue to take steps forward. We kind of know what he is on the defensive end, but I think his offensive game is still just getting started, and he's a great shooter and a great scorer already. So I can definitely see him kind of taking steps forward as well. But I think in order for this team to truly reach their max potential, we're going to have to see some great play from those role players that they brought in. So I'm not saying Russell Westbrook has to get back to his, prime Westbrook performances or anything like that. But when Jamal Murray needs a breather or anything, Westbrook's got to be able to get in and just kind of be that spark plug. He's got to be that guy that can come in, bring the energy. And we know Westbrook, how quick he is. Like, I'd like to see him become one of their like better guard defenders, to be honest. Like, I think he has the potential in his game. Not necessarily the best shooter, and we all know that, but if he could play great defense and then just honestly play that more of the facilitator role, I mean, that's when Russell Westbrook's going to really help this team. And then obviously Peyton Watson, I think the Denver Nuggets are really excited about this guy. He's shown growth, especially from his rookie year to last year, his sophomore season. Gaining from 8 minutes to 18 minutes a game and kind of growing in his scoring in every statistical category as well. I think they're going to be looking for a lot from him. But again, this team just goes as far as Nikola Jokic goes, and we've seen how that has been the past couple of seasons, so I can't see anything less from them.
Yeah. In terms of, I'll hit the Russell Westbrook point you brought up. Like you said, he's not a good shooter, and I think, at this stage in his career, I don't think anyone is expecting him to become a good shooter. But, I will say in one of their preseason games, he did knock down, I think, 2 of his 4 3-point attempts, which, I don't think they're expecting that every night. But if you can get him to at least, where defenses just aren't playing him, at the free throw line while he's on the perimeter, that's what they need from him. They don't need him shooting 40%, maybe get him, at least to 32, 33%. I think he'll be a key piece for them as well. And then Peyton Watson, he's an interesting part of this team because it seemed like in the first half of the season, he actually played a lot for the Nuggets. But then once it got down to like the playoff race and the playoffs, you never saw him. He just fell out of the rotation. Don't really know why, which I know a lot of teams kind of condense their rotations down a lot when it, gets later into the season. So I'm just kind of wondering, is he going to have a similar season where he gets a lot of playing time and then just seems like he trails off? Obviously, I think that depends on his growth. I think, like I said before, I think it depends how Christian Brown and a few of their other forwards are going to play. But I think, just like we stated, I think they'll be contenders. Anytime you have a 3-time MVP on your team, it's hard not to consider a team a contender.
Yeah. I think my biggest concern, if I had to bring one up for the Denver Nuggets, is going to be the guard depth. Just looking at their 100%. Lineup and everything that they have, I mean, we know that the front court is stacked. Jokic, Gordon, bringing in DeAndre Jordan. Dario Saric was actually a great get for this team. Really want to mention this. I mean, just a stretch 4. I think he could actually play well alongside Nikola Jokic because Nikola Jokic takes up so much of the paint. You can have Saric just spotting up in the corner on the offensive end. So that's a great get. And then you got your wings and Michael Porter Jr., Peyton Watson. But then it's that guard depth. Really all they have is Jamal Murray, Russell Westbrook, Christian Brown, and then Julian Strother, who is another guy, former Gonzaga Bulldog that they brought in last year, or was a rookie last year. I think he might play some minutes this year, and he's actually known for being a good shooter. Didn't have the best shooting performance last year, and that might have been just, adjusting to the NBA range and pace of the game and everything like that. But I think we're going to be seeing a lot more from this year. And then I think my biggest question is, do they rely on any of these rookies, at least early on in the season? Trey Alexander from Creighton, known as being a really good scorer. I think he could shoot well this year. It definitely has that in his game. But then the other 2 rookies they brought in, Daron Holmes and PJ Hall, they're both kind of big. So not sure how much run they're going to get. But I think Trey Alexander might be an interesting piece to keep looking at.
That's what I was wondering, because he played pretty well in the summer league too. Which I mean, it's proved there's been no correlation between summer league play and actual, NBA games in terms of efficiency and how well players play. But just want to put that out there. He did play pretty well. It definitely is going to be interesting to watch their rotations early on to see if they mix in these rookies. Um, I can't. I'm not sure how high they are on PJ Hall. I just personally I can't see him getting a whole lot of minutes. Um, I think if a rookie is going to get minutes, I can see Holmes, especially if there's some injuries there. Um, at that four position. I know you did mention maybe putting Saric at the four, but your defense is just gone at that point. If you're putting him at the four, they're going to be. But yeah, I think the biggest the biggest threat to this team is their depth. You start getting injuries. Don't really know who this team starts looking to, especially if one of their stars can go down.
Yeah. Last thing I'll mention, want to go back to Trey Alexander because I want to give him a quick shout out. He's actually a Tulsa boy. So shout out Trey Alexander from Heritage Hall High School. So excited to see him play this year and hoping he can actually put some good minutes together for the Denver Nuggets this upcoming season.
Love those Oklahoma boys.
Yes, sir. All right, moving on to the next team. We have the Portland Trailblazers. Biggest, I think, question that we have for the Trailblazers this year is what direction are they going? They brought in a lot of pieces, and I think we're both going to be on the same page in terms of what category we're going to put them in. But last season finished last in the West, so had a record of 21-61. But I will say they just have a lot of young guys, and this is young core. And I'll just go ahead and say it. I got them in a rebuild mode still. I don't think they brought in the pieces that they need to get anywhere else, but I'll quickly go through it. So returning core of Scoot Henderson, a high pick from last year's NBA draft, Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp, Jabari Walker, Robert Williams, Chris Murray, Matisse Thybulle, DeAndre Ayton, and then Jeremy Grant. Some key additions that they had, which I thought was very interesting. Denny Advia came over in a trade from the Washington Wizards. And then also, I think this is one of Connor's favorite draft picks, Donovan Clingan, getting him out of UConn, as well as signing Devontae Graham as a free agent. And then the only key loss they really had was Malcolm Brogdon went out in a trade, and then they lost Moses Brown in free agency. Connor, I'll let you go ahead and take it away from here on the Blazers.
I think you hit it right on the nose, is finding a direction. They have a really odd mix of players right now. Obviously, you highlighted Scoot Henderson, and then you highlighted Donovan Clingan. They're, top 2 draft picks from the past 2 seasons. Obviously, I think they want to keep those guys for sure. But they have a lot of players on their team that I am not expecting at all to be on this team by the end of the season. I'm going to highlight Anthony Simmons, Robert Williams, Matisse Thybulle, and Jeremy Grant specifically. I think those are players that contender or fringe playoff teams, or even, fringe contenders, are going to want. I think the biggest thing I'm going to highlight is the logjam at center. You have 3 players. You have Robert Williams, DeAndre Ayton, and Donovan Clingan. All of those 3 players play the same position. Really, none of them can kind of slide to the forward position. Robert Williams for sure can't shoot, really. And also has been dealing with a lot of injuries last season, hasn't really got to play a whole lot. But yeah, I'm kind of expecting them to break their roster down, trade a lot of these veterans, and, probably tanking for Flag.
Yeah, I completely agree. Don't think there's going to be much going on for this team. And like you said, I think this team might look completely different come the trade deadline this year. I think the main focus for the Portland Trailblazers this year is really just getting the young guys minutes and getting them run and making sure that they feel comfortable and that the Portland Trailblazers believe that they have the right group going forward. So Scoot Henderson, expect to see him play a lot. I expect Clingan to play a lot, even though they do have that long jam at center with Ayton and Williams, assuming, as you mentioned, one of them is going to get traded. And then actually, Denny Advia, I think this could be a breakout year for him. He played pretty well last year in Washington. Really just kind of grew his game in all aspects. I was averaging around 15 points per game and shooting 50% from the field. So definitely seeing jumps in both of those numbers. And I can see this is just kind of his breakout year where he says and shows to everyone like, hey, I can be maybe not a star, but a very solid role player in this league. So I actually really like that get for them, and I think it's going to be a good fit as well. The player I'm most excited about seeing, though, is Shaedon Sharpe. If you follow NBA and see them on Twitter or follow any highlights page on Twitter, you have seen Shaedon Sharpe and the absolute insane dunks that he throws down. He is one of my favorite players to watch and see his highlights, to be honest. Just a high flyer and has a great motor. But honestly, he's really young. I mean, came in as the 7th pick in the 2022 NBA draft and is only a sophomore or going on his 3rd season this year. And obviously he's seen jumps, played 33 minutes a game last year, averaged 16 points. So he's another exciting player that they have, but in the end, this team really doesn't have any stars. And in this league, you need stars to win big games. And I just don't see that happening. So this team's definitely going to be in a tanking for flag situation and mindset, I would say. So getting as many of those young guys minutes this season is going to be really crucial to the overall development and growth of the team in the upcoming years.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned him, but I think the key player in all this is Scoot Henderson. Struggled a lot last year. There's always kind of been concerns with his efficiency as a player. Even before he was drafted. At one point, he was regarded as the number 1 pick for that draft class, but then Wembanyama came up, and no team was passing on a 7'5" big who can stretch the floor and move like that. But Scoot Henderson, I think he had a chip on his shoulder. Kind of has yet to prove, that because he thought he was the better player, but I think he still has to prove that. Which, it's not unusual to see rookies struggle. That's part, of the process of being a rookie. So I think a big thing for him is just taking that next step. Hopefully the game can slow down for him. Hopefully, his shot starts improving. He struggled with his shots so much last year, which is not to say he didn't have bright spots. There were a couple of games last year where it was like, okay, like this kid has it. But it's just, he just never really got over that hump last year, as I feel like a lot of rookies tend to do. They kind of, at a certain point in the season, they start to put it together. I feel like he never really got over that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Scoot Henderson, but you are not as good as Victor Wembanyama, and unfortunately, I don't think you ever will be. So it's a great mindset for you to have, but I don't see it.
It kind of reminded me of Jalen Green and Cade Cunningham. How Jalen Green, got so mad that he wasn't the number 1 pick, and, Cade really didn't mind, or at least publicly, he never said really anything about it and just let his playing do the, talking. Yeah. And, I think he proved, he was he should have been the number 1 pick, and Jalen Green, proven he can score, still not as efficient. I know we talked about this last podcast. But, it was just a similarity there where it's like, the number 2 pick feels like they should be the number 1, but still have to prove that they should have been the number 1.
Yeah, they feel slighted for sure. Well, I got one final question for you for the Blazers before we move on. I know we talked about players that, could get traded, but I'm just wanting your opinion. In all reality, like, who do you think is getting traded and will no longer be a Blazer come the end of the year?
So I think there's 2 for sure players that are not going to be on this roster. And I think that's going to be Robert Williams. And I think it's going to be Jeremy Grant. I feel like every season, no matter what team he's on, Jeremy Grant is on trade rumors, which is crazy because I think he's a really good player, But yeah, I really don't see why a contender or even, a playoff pushing team doesn't want one of these two players. Especially Robert Williams. He's a great big who can come off your bench, play defense. He knows his role on the team and he plays it well and he excels.
Hey, the Warriors will take him gladly. The Warriors will take Robert
Yeah,
Williams gladly.
no, and I think that could be a team, that could maybe want one of these dudes. Losing Klay Thompson, Warriors, I think they're a little team that it's kind of like, oh, our superstars getting old, but should we also, be going younger, or should we be trying to contend with Curry's last few years? Which, we'll get into that
Yes.
more next episode.
Yes.
But I think the Warriors could be a team that could want one of these two dudes, to help them out, especially if they're making that playoff push. But yeah, like I said, those are the two dudes who for sure I'm expecting not to be on this team.
Yeah, I agree. And the last one I'll throw in there, and I'll be super quick, but I think Anthony Simons actually should be someone that we take a look at as well. Simons is a great player, to be honest. I just don't think he fits that group, especially when you have Scoot Henderson as the guy that you're kind of building around, or one of the building blocks. Those two both need the ball in their hands to be as, productive and at their best. And I think Simons is going to be someone that might look to be moved off of. So that can make another team pretty happy around the trade deadline as well. But we'll go ahead and move on to our next team. So we got the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the biggest question we're asking ourselves for this team is, what is this team going to look like without Karl Anthony Towns? And can Anthony Edwards just take even another step this year and be that superstar that I think everybody in the league and everyone around the league is expecting him to be? So quick recap of the T-Wolves season last year. Finished second in the West, ended up losing to the Mavericks in the conference finals, and had a record of 56-26 to end the season. Have the returning core of Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, obviously, Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and then had a few key additions. Actually, I should say a lot, as well as some key losses. Connor, I'll let you go over those and give us your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so some key additions. I'll do an addition / a loss, which obviously the biggest one, they traded away Cat recently, Karl Anthony Towns. They traded him for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo. I think Keita Bates-Diop came over in that trade as well. But then they also drafted Rob Dillingham, Terrence Shannon, and then they ended up signing Joe Ingles and PJ Dozier as well. But they are losing Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, and Monte Morris as well. Obviously, we can talk about the big one first off. Cat for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, the two main pieces that they got in that trade. Yeah, I think obviously a surprise. I think a lot of it probably had to do with finances with the Timberwolves. Obviously they got a lot between Gobert, Conley, Edwards, with Naz Reid also being a former sixth man, and he plays pretty well. So, I'm sure finances was a huge part of it. I feel like we've been saying this so much over the past couple of weeks, but there's just so many new financial rules, and the salary cap not increasing the next 2 summers. Teams don't have as much spending power as they did, and it seems like a lot of these previous signings, the past 2 summers, the past 2 seasons are really coming to bite teams right now, handing guys $60 million a year. And it's like, oh, our salary cap isn't increasing. How are we going to pay to have any other players on the team? But I think they got 2 good players that can pretty well fit into their team. Obviously, Dante DiVincenzo, I think he's a player that can excel at any team he goes to. He's going to compete night in and night out. I know in his first preseason game, he came in and hit some big threes for them, which I know Anthony Edwards is going to love that, having that around him, especially when you have a guy like Rudy Gobert on your team. You need shooters on your team. And Julius Randle, he can knock down a 3 when he needs to. He's not going to be a sharp shooter, but he's been known to heat up, and seems like he scores 30 points in the blink of an eye. So yeah, I think I like the pieces. I think losing Cat is gonna come with its challenges, but I think they're in a good spot after that trade.
Yeah, a few things I'll say on the Karl Anthony Towns trade was one, I think, as you mentioned, this has to do with the new CBA and all the, money things that are going on behind the scenes that the Timberwolves were just kind of looking at it and, felt like one, they could afford to, they needed to do this in order to kind of afford to go forward. Bringing in Julius Randle is no slouch as well. I think the biggest piece of this trade is not Julius Randle, though. It's Dante DiVincenzo. This guy is going to be great for the Minnesota Timberwolves. As you mentioned, he is one of those guys that you can almost plug and play in any team, and every team would love to have a guy like Dante DiVincenzo. Right now, we're kind of projecting the starting lineup to look like Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. I wouldn't be surprised if they change the starting lineup or if the closing lineup replaces Conley for DiVincenzo, to be completely honest, because that's just the type of player he is. So I think DiVincenzo is going to have a great season. The other thing about this Karl Anthony Towns trade is I think this is showing the belief that they have in Naz Reid. So Naz Reid is their backup center. And I think last year we were all asking the question, why in the world do the Timberwolves pay 3 starting centers big money, basically, right? You had Rudy Gobert, you had Karl Anthony Towns, you had Naz Reid. And it was one of these things where it's like they had one too many. And I think they just believe that Naz Reid can be that guy and really not necessarily take Karl Anthony Towns' role, but he's going to be that, supplement piece off the bench that when Rudy Gobert or Julius Randle comes out, Naz Reid goes in, and there's not really a loss in production there. I like this team a lot. I think they made some really good moves and really want to jump into their draft because I think they got maybe one of the steals of the draft and Terrence Shannon. And then they got Rob Dillingham, who is absolutely electric. If you watched him at Kentucky last season, this guy can fill it up and fill it up quick in terms of getting buckets. And seeing Rob Dillingham and Anthony Edwards playing beside each other is going to be a sight to see. I'm not sure how much playing time he's going to get this season, but I could see early on them giving him some minutes and trying to get some run in as well, just to get them more prepared. But they had a pretty good summer league as well. So I'm very excited for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. In terms of putting them in a category, though, I'm going to put them as a playoff lock. I don't know if they have enough to get them to that contender status. I think in terms of stardom, you got Anthony Edwards and, maybe Julius Randle, maybe Rudy Gobert. And when you have someone like Rudy Gobert on your team's always going to be in it from a defensive perspective. I just don't know if they have enough from the offensive side of things to get them over that hump to make them a contender. But this team will definitely be playing in the playoffs this year.
Yeah. I think, honestly, I'm expecting Rob Dillingham to get a decent amount of playing time, even with Mike Conley on the roster. Mike Conley, you're not going to expect him to probably play more than 30 minutes a game anymore. That's just not the kind of player he is anymore. Maybe if this was 8 years ago, we would expect that from Mike Conley. But I'm fully expecting Rob Dillingham to get those minutes that Mike Conley's not on the floor, and it's not crunch time. I'm expecting Dillingham to fill that role. And then going back to DiVincenzo, I think he filled this team's biggest need, which is that wing position. Because before this, who were they going to plug there off the bench? Are you going to ask Terrence Shannon, Joe Ingles, or PJ Dozier to give you quality minutes off the bench? I'd be surprised if Joe Ingles can play more than 10 minutes a game right now. And then obviously I don't think you're going to rely on Terrence Shannon or PJ Dozier to give you, 20 minutes a game, if that. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I think DiVincenzo was the biggest part of this trade because it really bulked up their wing. In terms of defense and offense. But yeah, in terms of where I'm expecting them, I'm kind of the playoff lock as well. I think they're a team that could become a title contender. I think it depends how well Anthony Edwards plays. We kind of saw him trail off in the playoffs. He definitely went cold in that second round. Or sorry, not the second round, in the Western Conference Finals against the Mavs. it just kind of seems for large parts of the game, it was just like, where's Anthony Edwards? You know, like we saw Jade McDaniels hit shots, and then even Cat was scoring more, and then it was just like Anthony Edwards just like disappeared in large stretches of these games, which, if he is going to be a top 10 player in the NBA and be one of the faces of the NBA, that just can't happen, in the playoffs. Um, and when people have these expectations and you yourself are like, I'm one of the best players, I think you need to prove it. And I think this is a season that's great for that. Just because he had that disappointing end to the playoff run. But yeah, so I'm right there with you. Playoff lock, not a title contender just yet. But I will say this team is not far off from being a title contender.
Yep. 100% agree on that one. And I'm excited to see where this team goes. Maybe they make another move, maybe they don't. But I think anytime that a team is going up against the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's going to be a long night, but a fun game to watch. Moving on to our next team, we got the Utah Jazz. Last season, they finished 12th in the West with a record of 31-51. And honestly, the question we're asking with this team is, are you rebuilding or are you trying to make the playoffs? I don't know if there's a clear direction yet, and that might be come apparent early on in the season. They have a returning core of Lauri Markkanen, Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton, Walker Kessler, Taylor Hendricks, John Collins, and Keontae George. Shout out Baylor. And then had a few key additions this year, a lot from the draft. So in the draft, we got Cody Williams, Kyle Filipowski, and Isaiah Collier. From free agency, brought in a key piece in Patty Mills, which is really going to firm up that backcourt from a bench perspective. And then also signed Oscar Tshiebwe and then Max Asmus as an undrafted free agent. Some key losses they had. I don't necessarily know how key they were, but Darius Baisley, Chris Dunn left in a sign and trade. This one might be big. Taylor Horton Tucker left as a free agent. Kira Lewis Jr. and then Kenneth Lofton Jr. was waived. So my initial thoughts on the Utah Jazz is, again, I don't necessarily know what this team's trying to accomplish. I don't think they have enough to make a playoffs, but I don't think they have a little to be in full rebuild. So it's like, what moves are you trying to make during the season to get to that next step? Or are you going to kind of blow it up? I don't know, Connor, if you're thinking the same thing, but that's just immediately where my mind goes.
Yeah, I think it's just so hard for them because a lot of these players, were on the team when the Jazz blew up their roster a few years ago with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. And then, the Jazz ended up making the playoffs that year, and they came out the gates as like a top 3 seed for a good chunk of the season as well. So, I'm sure they're kind of like, so many of our key players are still on this team. So like, why are we not still good? Which Markkanen, he's another one of those players who I feel like his name comes up in trade rumors all the time. But yeah, I think this team needs to decide what they want to do. It's just like, we didn't have the best of seasons last year. With a similar roster as the year before, but we had a worse season. Do we want to keep Markkanen or not? And then, what role is Colin Sexton playing? Are we even going to give him a lot of minutes? Because it kind of seems like Colin Sexton, he'll play well, but then a team wants to move on for him. He gets hurt, and teams don't want him. He's just kind of had, a very much up and down NBA career so far. But, I think these players are teams that title contenders and playoff teams are going to want, especially Jordan Clarkson and John Collins. I think those are 2 players that other teams are probably eyeing to see if, hey, are the Jazz about to deconstruct their roster? But I think a big thing is they're going to see how the first, quarter, first third of the season goes for them. I can see them trying to want to be competitive, but then, things start going downhill. I can see them tearing this roster apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I honestly think this team is like 1 or 2 players away from actually being a play-in bubble team, or maybe even a playoff lock, to be honest. Like, they have really good pieces. Lauri Markkanen was an all-star last year. great player. I mean, averaged in the 20s and, was someone that was a problem whenever you played against him. Then you have John Collins came over from Atlanta. I mean, we saw what he could do early on in his career with Trae Young in Atlanta. Like, I don't think he's just completely done now. Like, he still has that in him. Walker Kessler had a really good rookie year, but for
Mhm.
some reason last season, I feel like regressed a little bit and didn't go take the step forward that we were expecting in his sophomore year. And then Colin Sexton, I mean, we know early on in his career when he was in Cleveland, like he was pretty good. And then obviously ends up in Utah. And last season, he actually had a sneaky good year. But again, it's just like, what are you wanting to do with these players? Like you have assets. Are you wanting to, get rid of them and then gain a lot of draft capital to where you're just fully rebuilding? Or are you actually wanting to go for it? And I think they decided that they wanted to go for it whenever they re-signed Larry Markkinen this offseason.
Yep.
When they did that, because that was the big question that we had, right? Was Larry Markkinen gonna, no longer be a member of the Utah Jazz, or were they gonna re-sign him? And I mean, as a Golden State fan, I was like wanting Lowry so bad to be in Golden State and was really hoping that happened. And when I saw the news that he got re-signed, wasn't my favorite thing, but I really think that's the Jazz doubling down on moving forward and wanting to try and contend with this team for a playoff spot. I just don't know if they made enough moves after that to do so.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the re-signing Laurie Markkinen was definitely an indicator that the Jazz, like I said, to start the season, are going to try to compete. Um, but I think you hit it right on the head. In terms of free agency and even the draft, they weren't very aggressive in a whole lot. I mean, I know they brought in Cody Williams. And honestly, I think a steal that they got in the draft is Kyle Filipowski from Duke.
Fell to the
At
second
one
round.
point, yeah, at one point he was a projected lottery pick. And
He was in the green room. He literally
yeah,
sat there the
he
entire
was
night
there
on
exactly.
the first day of the draft and didn't get picked.
Yep, I know. Like people were expecting him to be long gone by the time he fell to the Jazz. Um, which I'm not saying he's going to become a star player, but I think that pick where they got him was a huge steal. Um, and then also, I think a signing that might be a little under the radar could be Drew Eubanks. He's not a bad player. He's been serviceable for the Spurs. Um, you know, I think he's someone, if someone gets hurt or whatnot, he's a player who can easily fill in for them, and just do what he needs to do. Um, but yeah, I think this team is just so weirdly constructed. Um, and to me, at least, I feel like I'm just still not sure how the pieces fit together for the Jazz.
I agree. And last one I'll mention, Isaiah Collier. I mean, this guy was actually one of the, projected to be one of the top picks going into college basketball last season, and just
Mm-hmm.
actually had a decent start of the year with USC, but then just really dropped off. So I feel like the Jazz were really just drafting on like upside, like, hey, these are where players were projected at some point. Like, if we can get them later in the draft and kind of get those steals, like maybe they'll turn into something. So we'll have to see. But with Cody Williams, we all know how his brother turned out in Oklahoma City. Jalen Williams is, a complete beast, and we'll actually flip to his team here in a second. But I think they're just hoping Cody Williams can do some of the same and really fill that void. Because if Cody Williams can do that, and especially early on, this team has an opportunity to be a play-in team. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and put them in the category. I think they're in rebuild mode, and I think they'll end up being tanking by the end of the year.
Yeah. I can speak from Cody Williams. OKC was screaming at Sam Presti to trade up for Cody Williams to unite the brothers. And in OKC, obviously didn't happen. But I'm along the same lines. By the trade deadline at the latest, I'm expecting this team to be tanking for flag.
I agree. Well, all right, let's move on to the last team and one of the more exciting teams because I think we both have some personal ties to it. We got the Oklahoma City Thunder. Finished last season as the number 1 seed in the West, but ended up losing in the second round to the Dallas Mavericks in a great series, like a great series between the two teams. Had a record of 57-25 to the end of the year. And boy, did they bring a lot back. We got Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, the other Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, Kason Wallace, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe. Brought in some key addition as well as got in Alex Caruso in a trade, Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency, and then in the draft got Nikola Topic and Dylan Jones. And then some key losses. Obviously, Josh Giddey is no longer in Oklahoma City as he gets shipped off to Chicago. Gordon Hayward retired. Lindy Waters, Oklahoma State boy, got traded over to Golden State. And then Mike Muscala, Bismack Biyombo, and Keontae Johnson all left in free agency. So a lot is happening with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Sam Presti is obviously working his magic. Connor, I'll send it over to you. How do we feel about the Thunder and their chances this upcoming year?
Yeah, I feel like a lot happened for them, but also not a lot happened for them. It was like they made a couple big moves, but it's also like they kept pretty much every major contributor from last year, which is just crazy to think that they were able to swing that. But obviously, Sam Presti typically works his miracles. Don't know how, he has yet to give up a first-round pick for anyone in the past few years, but who am I to say anything about that? But yeah, I think last year, the Thunder, especially in that second round, like I mentioned, realized they were kind of lacking size. I think Chet was able to hold up the entire season, and in that first round against the Pelicans, they played Jonas off the field, off the court in that matchup, but then they got to that second round, and it was just like Lively and Gafford just killed the Thunder on defense and on the boards, so obviously Isaiah Hartenstein signing for them was huge. I like it. I think it gives them when he finally gets to play for them in the regular season, he'll miss 5 to 6 weeks. Hopefully he can come back sooner. But when he gets to play, it gives them just so much flexibility. If they're playing a bigger team, they can put Chet at the 4 and slide Hartenstein down to the 5. Or, if they're playing a team that likes to play maybe a little more small ball, move Chet down to the 5, and put Jalen Williams maybe at the 4. I think that signing was huge for them. But then them getting Caruso for Giddey was crazy. I think it gives them another 3-and-D player. And I think a 3-and-D player who seems to be regarded as one of the better ones in the league at that. Because I don't think Alex Caruso is going to be telling, Shea, hey, I need 15 shots a game. I think Alex Caruso is a player who's perfectly content, taking 6 to 7 shots, but he's shooting efficiently, while also playing solid defense. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about for OKC this summer.
When you have a player like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander on your team, I mean, you always got a shot. And then Sam Presti just knows how to build a team. One of the best GMs, if not the best GMs in the league, to be completely honest. I mean, you got Shea, and then just all the shooting he has put around Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is absolutely insane. And then, obviously, as you mentioned, Sam Presti sees a need, and he goes out and gets it. They get killed on the boards. They bring in Isaiah Hartenstein. And then, obviously, the other thing is they develop players. I mean, we got guys like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, who was like
Dort.
Anything about them. And then all of a sudden they're on the Thunder. And then the next thing you know, they're hitting 4 or 5 threes. And you're like, who is this guy? I mean, Oklahoma City has got this down. When everyone thought they were out, they lose Harden, they lose Durant, they lose Westbrook. And then it's like, what are we going to do? They get Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and they just do what they do. They start developing players and developing talent, and then they're one of the best teams in the league again. This team is a contender for sure, and I don't think that's scary to say at all. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, expecting him to have another MVP-like season, and then obviously you just got all the 3-and-D guys around him. The one guy I want to talk about, Chet Holmgren, he had a great year last year, and I think it was getting overshadowed by Victor Wembanyama, to be completely honest. I mean, It was Chet's rookie season last year as well, and he played all 82 games, ended up averaging around 16 and a half points per game, and also shot 37% from three as a center in the league. I mean,
Mhm.
this guy is another freak of nature and just an exciting player to watch. Brought in great free agents and Alex Caruso. And then obviously, I don't even know if their draft picks are going to do anything for this year, but at this point, you like can't count them out because Sam Presti knows what he's doing. So I'm excited to see what this team has got going on. I think we're going to see an emergence from Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. Who knows? Casey Wallace might come out and just be a great shooter as well. At this point, can't count anything out.
Yeah, I think you hit one of their most important players with Chet Holmgren. I know you said his stats there. It's like those aren't just like empty stats, that like a lot of young players put up where it's like, they're shooting 25 times a game, averaging this many points. No, like he was shooting less than 12 times a game, averaging this, shooting over 50%, like you said, 37% from three. I think Sam Presti, built a team around Shea and Chet that just fit perfectly with them. But I think it's also important to note that Mark Daigneault has them playing together, and just has them buying into his system. They did not have a whole lot of nationally televised games last year, but going to the games and just watching them, it's like a brotherhood, and it's truly like they would die for each other. Trey Mann got traded last season, and like every player was like heartbroken. Even like Trey Mann wasn't a big contributor for that team. He typically only played if Shea was out or something like that. But I think that speaks to the volume that the culture that Sam Presti and Mark Daigneault have built here, and it's allowed like every single player on this team to flourish. I think like you said, it's like they have not really missed on a draft pick in so long. Um, like I don't think anyone expected any of their recent draft picks to be as good as they are. Even I know like Jalen Williams, was a lottery pick, but I don't think people were expecting him to be an all-star. And then it's like, oh, this dude is averaging almost 20 points a game. I think one of my favorite things is going to that game, and anytime he does something good, the whole stadium just starts barking. And it's phenomenal, and it's been cool to see the Thunder just build up to what they are.
Agreed, and I'm happy for the state of Oklahoma, obviously being from there. So it's exciting to watch. Such a dynamic trio with Shea, Jalen, and Chet, and I can see them
Yeah.
being the number one seed again. And I think it's just going to be even scarier once they get Hartenstein back. I mean, let's just real quick think about the fact that when Hartenstein gets back, they have the opportunity to move everyone down. Like Chet goes from a 5 to a 4, Jalen goes from a 4 to a 3, Dort goes from a 3 to a 2, and then you still have Shea at the 1. I mean, this team's going to be huge, and they can all move. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
And like Shea is already, I would say an above average height for a point guard to start with. So yeah, if you're throwing in another 7-footer along with, Chet down there, it's just like defensively, this team is going to be terrifying for opposing teams.
Chet at the 4 is scary. Chet at
Mhm.
the 4 is really scary. And
Especially since he can move well too. It's not like Cat sliding to 4 where it's like, oh, like how's he going to be defensively? The expectation is, oh, Chet is going to be just as good as he was at center.
for sure. And let me remind you, 37% from 3 as a rookie. Center. Let that sink in. I wouldn't be surprised if the dude shoots 39, maybe even 40% this year. And that's scary.
Terrifying.
All right. So are we both in agreement, though? This team is definitely a contender and maybe one of the favorites to win the West?
Oh, hands down. I'm not gonna lie, they are probably the favorite to be the first seed in the West right now.
All right. One more question for you. Can the Oklahoma City Thunder take down the Boston Celtics if they end up meeting in the NBA Finals?
I think that is going. hypothetically, which I think these are probably the two favorites right now, they meet in the finals. I think that is going to be one of the most entertaining finals that we've had in a long time. I feel like recently the finals have really not been that entertaining. It seems like some team wins 4-1 or 4-2. I would expect that series to go to 7 games. Which honestly, I think the Thunder, just the way they're built, and I think their depth is what gives them an edge over the Celtics.
Agree. I think it would definitely go to 7 games. And hey, if the Thunder end up being the team with home court advantage in that one, don't be surprised if we see the Thunder getting that banner at the end of the year.
Yeah, you know what's crazy is the city, like, there was some worry that the Thunder were actually going to leave OKC. Like, the city had a vote last year to keep them in OKC. And like the PR and the press that they had to do just to get people to vote yes was insane. But obviously they extended their stay in OKC for a decent while, I would say. But yeah, I just thought that was crazy that was even a possibility, that where the team is right now, they had a chance not to be in OKC.
Yeah, it's crazy. The Oklahoma City Thunder fan base is one of the best fan bases in the NBA by far. If you haven't experienced it in person and you have the ability to, would highly recommend you to do so. It's such a fun atmosphere, and obviously with it being the only professional team in Oklahoma, that's something that we got to keep. Yeah, professional major league team. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah. Well, before we go, let's quick run through our 3 questions. So who do we think is going to win the division? Who do we think is going to be last in the division? And then lastly, who is our dark horse in the division and could make it far in the playoffs? But I'll send it over to you first. I think we both got the same answer for the first one, but who do you think is going to win this division?
I mean, I'm going with the Thunder. I think, like we've talked about, I think this one has some 3 heavyweights in it who have a good chance to repeat as the top 3 seeds once again. But I think the Thunder made the biggest moves to address their team needs. I think they're the deepest team in this division. I think they take it once again.
I agree. I'm going with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I like what you said there. Comparing Oklahoma City to Minnesota and Denver, I think Sam Presti did kind of what the other GMs didn't really do, was saw a need, addressed the need, and got better. Not that Denver or Minnesota really got all that much worse or anything like that. But I do think that Presti just did what he does and, finds a need and fixes it. Moving on to who we think is going to lose this division. I think it's a 2-team race between the Jazz and the Blazers, but I would be highly surprised if it was anything other than the Trailblazers this year.
Yeah. I think it would take heaven and earth moving to get the Trailblazers not to finish last. Yeah, no. I'm sure they've been instructed, don't win games. So
yeah, they're just gonna be playing the young guys, and then hopefully at the end they might be slowing it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, the question that might get the most interesting between the two of us: who is our dark horse in the division? If the Oklahoma City Thunder isn't going to win it, and if there's a team that's going to make some noise in this division but also in the playoffs, who do you think that's going to be?
I think calling one of these teams a dark horse, I think, is like kind of disrespectful to them, because they're just like, I think they're also both contenders. But I'm probably going to go with at least the Timberwolves, just because I think we didn't consider them contenders just yet. So I'm going to go with the Timberwolves right now. Obviously, moving on for Cat, like I said, is going to be hard for them, but they address their biggest need with the wing. I think they can match up pretty well, at least from a starter standpoint, to the Thunder. In terms of position by position, I think the biggest, obviously, is Shea and Mike Conley. Obviously, I think there's a big gap right there. But honestly, from top down, they can at least compete. I'm not saying any of their players are better. I think Ant obviously takes it at the shooting guard position. But, Rudy Gobert, Jane McDaniels, like, they're not bad players. Julius Randle, like, they can hold their own. So they're definitely my dark horse.
All right, this one might be a little surprising, but give me the Utah Jazz as my dark horse. And let me explain why. There is a lot of variability with this team. When I chose what they were going to be, I said, I think they're going to be rebuilding and tanking by the end of the year. And I do believe that. But when we think of a dark horse, you got to think of someone that, like, if the chips fall just right, like they can make some noise. And for the Utah Jazz, I feel like if they just get that one final piece, and if Cody Williams pops like he might, like this team actually can make some noise. I don't think they're going to be contending in any scenario, but I mean, we saw it last year. Like for a large part of the season, they were one of the top seeds in the West, and then obviously throughout the end of it, just fell out of it. I think they could do something like that again. This team is going to have to play together. There's not a clear star other than Lauri Markkanen. And so, if they ended up trading for someone or one of the rookies does something exciting, or who knows, if they just stay healthy, sometimes that's the name of the game. Like this team can end up making the playoffs or at least the play-in. And when you make the play-in, you only have to win 1 or 2 games to make it in the playoffs. So give me the Jazz as the dark horse. But again, it's not likely, but it could happen.
I don't hate them for a dark horse.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, I think that's all we have today. So thank you to everybody that's watching and listening. And as always, if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. And share it with your friends and family if they have anybody that likes basketball and wants to learn more. If you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, anything like that, please give us a 5-star review and share the podcast as well. We greatly appreciate it. And we have one more division to go through. So make sure you're staying tuned and listening and waiting for that one. But the NBA season kicks off, Connor. I'm excited. How are we feeling? Are you ready to go?
I am ready. I wish it would start now. I know we have a few preseason games left for some teams, but yeah, no, man, it's excited. I think, like I said, this is probably one of the most heavyweighted divisions in the NBA, if not the most heavyweight. All these teams are going to be fun to watch. Thunder, the Thunder, Nuggets, and Timberwolves, look out for these 3 teams.
Yeah, we could all see them hanging a banner or at least, contending at that Western Conference final at the end of the season. But I think that's all for us today. Again, we appreciate the time, and we'll see you next side on Courtside. Peace.
Peace.